The massive diplomatic shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, its sleek silver hull cutting through wispy clouds with precision. Inside, Princess Zora-Il of the Quilarian Empire adjusted her royal diplomatic attire, her multiple iridescent tendrils trembling with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Her species' communication protocols demanded absolute composure, but today, something felt different. Commander Krell, her chief security advisor, stood nearby, his scaled skin shifting colors, a clear sign of his own nervous energy. "Your Highness," he whispered, "remember our mission. Humans are considered unpredictable by galactic standards. Maintain distance. Maintain protocol." Zora-Il's large, almond-shaped eyes, a deep metallic blue typical of Quilarian royalty, narrowed slightly. She had spent years studying human communication, their bizarre cultural nuances, and their seemingly chaotic social structures. While most galactic species operated on rigid hierarchical systems, humans seemed to thrive on something far more complex and dynamic. As the shuttle touched down at the United Earth Diplomatic Base in New Mexico, Zora-Il took a measured breath. Her research indicated humans appreciated both strength and vulnerability, a concept that had confused Quilarian diplomats for decades. She would need to be perfect. The airlock hissed open, revealing a stark contrast to the ornate interior of her shuttle. The human reception area was surprisingly minimalist: clean lines, neutral colors, functional design. And there, standing exactly 3 meters from the shuttle's entrance, stood Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez. He was not what she expected. Most galactic military representatives projected an aura of intimidating formality. Rodriguez stood casually, one hand slightly in his pocket, a soft smile playing on his lips. His dark skin and sharp, intelligent eyes seemed to take in every detail without appearing threatening. His uniform was impeccable, but something about his posture suggested flexibility rather than rigidity. "Princess Zora-Il," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that scientific reports had failed to capture. "Welcome to Earth. I hope your journey was comfortable." Quilarian protocol demanded a specific response, a ritualistic greeting that would establish diplomatic distance. But something in Rodriguez's genuine smile made her hesitate. For the first time in her diplomatic career, Princess Zora-Il felt a flutter of something unexpected: curiosity. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," she responded, her translator rendering her native language into perfect English. The journey was illuminating. A slight chuckle escaped Rodriguez's lips. Not mocking, but genuinely amused. Illuminating. That's a diplomatic way of saying something, isn't it? Her tendrils, which typically remained absolutely still during formal interactions, betrayed her by subtly shifting colors. A Quilarian biological response to emotional complexity. Rodriguez noticed, his eyes flickering with what seemed like genuine interest rather than the clinical observation she was accustomed to. Commander Krell stepped forward, his protective instincts flaring. "The official diplomatic proceedings will commence at—" "Actually," Rodriguez interrupted, a move that would have been considered gravely offensive in Quilarian culture, "we thought you might appreciate some Earth refreshments first. Our analysts suggested your metabolic system might enjoy a particular beverage we call chai tea." Zora-Il's research databases hadn't prepared her for this. Interruption was a serious breach of protocol. Yet Rodriguez presented the suggestion not as a challenge, but as a gesture of consideration. Her tendrils shifted again, this time to a soft lavender, indicating intrigue. Little did Princess Zora-Il know that this first encounter would be the beginning of something far beyond a typical diplomatic mission. Humans, she was about to learn, were nothing like any species she had ever encountered in her extensive galactic travels. The conference room buzzed with an energy that made Princess Zora-Il distinctly uncomfortable. Unlike Quilarian meetings, which were meticulously organized with predetermined speaking slots and rigid seating arrangements, this human briefing felt like controlled chaos. Lieutenant Rodriguez moved between different team members, each interaction unique. A young technician received a supportive pat on the shoulder. An older analyst was greeted with a respectful nod. A junior officer was given direct, specific guidance. No single communication method seemed standard. Suddenly, an alarm blared. A holographic display flickered with warning signs, a potential communication system malfunction that could derail their entire diplomatic meeting. Most alien species would have frozen, waiting for a senior official to make a decision. Not these humans. "Maria, check the quantum stabilizers," Rodriguez called out. "Derek, run a cross-system diagnostic. Asha, prepare backup communication protocols." Within seconds, each team member moved with purpose. No formal commands were repeated. No elaborate explanations were needed. They understood their roles instantly. Zarael watched in fascination. Her own species would have required a 37-step verification process before taking any action. These humans moved like a single organism, each part understanding its role without explicit instruction. "Interesting, isn't it?" Rodriguez's voice startled her. He stood beside her, his eyes tracking his team's movements. "Your team's response is unconventional," Zarael responded carefully. Rodriguez grinned. "We call it adaptive problem solving. Every team member is trained to think independently while supporting the collective goal." The communication system stabilized within minutes. No panic, no blame, just efficient resolution. Commander Krell, standing nearby, looked visibly agitated. In Quillarian culture, such a spontaneous response would be considered dangerous. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. "On the contrary," Zarael found herself saying, surprising even herself, "this is remarkably efficient." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her observation. Most diplomatic visitors found human methods too unpredictable. Yet she saw something more, a complex, living system of cooperation. As the team settled back into their positions, Rodriguez turned to her. "Would you like to understand how we developed this approach?" Before she could respond, he began explaining. Humans had learned these collaboration techniques through centuries of diverse challenges, from complex scientific endeavors to survival in harsh environments. Each crisis, each challenge had been a learning opportunity. Zarael realized something profound. While Quillarian society viewed challenges as threats to be avoided, humans saw them as chances to grow, to adapt, to become stronger. The communication system's holographic display now showed a complex analysis of potential diplomatic scenarios. But instead of a rigid, predetermined path, the display showed multiple potential approaches, each with calculated risks and opportunities. "We don't believe in perfect plans," Rodriguez explained. "We believe in flexible thinking and rapid adaptation." Commander Krell looked horrified. Princess Zarael felt something else entirely, a growing respect for this unpredictable species. As the briefing continued, she found herself leaning forward, her metallic blue eyes capturing every detail of this human interaction. Something was changing in her understanding of intelligent cooperation. The diplomatic mission had only just begun, but Princess Zarael was beginning to suspect that humans were far more complex than any galactic report could ever capture. Princess Zarael spent the next 24 hours diving deep into classified human records. What she discovered both fascinated and terrified her. Humans, it seemed, were walking contradictions. A species that could commit terrible acts of violence could also demonstrate extraordinary compassion. They would fight brutally in wars, then rebuild their enemies' societies. They would face near-extinction-level challenges and somehow emerge stronger. Lieutenant Rodriguez's personnel file was particularly intriguing. Born to immigrant parents in a challenging urban environment, he had transformed potential limitations into strengths. Multiple academic achievements. Military service driven not by conquest, but by a desire to protect. Volunteer work in conflict resolution during his personal time. Her research AI struggled to categorize human behavioral patterns. Where most species had predictable response mechanisms, humans seemed to rewrite their own psychological rulebook continuously. Analyzing human psychological data, Rodriguez's voice interrupted her concentration. Zorail's tendrils reflexively changed color, a Quillarian response to being caught off guard. "Merely conducting standard diplomatic research," she replied, attempting to sound casual. Rodriguez chuckled. "Standard research doesn't make your biological indicators shift colors like a mood ring." He pulled up a chair, demonstrating another human trait that constantly surprised her: casual intimacy with potential strategic opponents. In Quillarian culture, such proximity would be considered a threat. For humans, it seemed a method of building understanding. "Humans are complex," he said. "We don't fit into simple categories." Zorail's research had confirmed this. Humans had survived multiple near-extinction events, climate disasters, pandemics, violent conflicts. Each challenge transformed them rather than breaking them. "Your species seems unnecessarily complicated," she observed. Rodriguez laughed, a sound that seemed to carry multiple emotional layers. "Complexity is our strength. We adapt, we learn, we change." He shared a story about his grandmother, who had survived multiple economic collapses, immigrated to a new country, learned a new language, and still managed to send her children to university. Each obstacle became a stepping stone, not a barrier. Zorail realized something profound. While Quillarian society viewed challenges as threats to be managed, humans saw them as opportunities for growth. The psychological data revealed something even more startling. Humans possessed an almost irrational capacity for hope. Scientific studies showed that even in extreme conditions, environmental disasters, economic collapse, personal tragedies, a significant percentage maintained optimistic perspectives. "We don't just survive," Rodriguez said, seemingly reading her thoughts. "We find meaning in survival." Commander Krell, listening nearby, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Quillarian philosophy emphasized strategic withdrawal when challenges seemed insurmountable. Humans seemed to do the exact opposite. As evening approached, Rodriguez invited her to observe something he called a team-building exercise. Zorail expected a formal military drill. Instead, she witnessed something entirely unexpected. The military team wasn't just practicing tactical movements. They were sharing personal stories, supporting each other's emotional landscapes, laughing, creating human connections that seemed as strategically important as their physical training. One soldier spoke about overcoming personal challenges. Another shared a joke that made everyone laugh. A third discussed a complex engineering problem they were solving together. Zorail's scientific mind struggled to process this. How could emotional vulnerability be considered a strength in a military unit? As night fell, she realized the human paradox. Their greatest weapon wasn't technology or physical strength. It was their ability to transform, to hope, to connect, even in the most challenging circumstances. The diplomatic mission was revealing something far more complex than any initial briefing could have predicted. The simulation room was unlike anything Princess Zorail had ever experienced. Instead of a standard tactical assessment, Lieutenant Rodriguez had prepared what he called a moral complexity scenario, a test that would challenge everything she understood about decision-making. The holographic display flickered to life, presenting a complex scenario. A damaged spacecraft drifted in deep space, limited rescue resources, multiple groups with competing survival priorities. The catch: each choice would save some but inevitably condemn others. Zorail expected a cold, calculated approach. Quillarian strategy would involve a mathematical optimization, save the most statistically valuable lives, minimize overall resource expenditure. Rodriguez gathered his team. Instead of immediate strategic planning, they began discussing something unexpected: the individual stories of each potential rescue target. Maria was a medical researcher working on a cure for a genetic disease. One team member shared. "Derek has 3 young children," another added. "Asha is the primary caregiver for her elderly parents." Commander Krell looked horrified. "This is absurd," he whispered to Zorail. "Personal stories are irrelevant to strategic decision-making." But Zarail found herself captivated. The humans weren't just calculating numbers. They were weighing individual human experiences, potential futures, interconnected lives. Rodriguez listened carefully, his expression reflecting deep internal conflict. This wasn't just a mission. This was a profoundly human moment of moral wrestling. "We can't save everyone," he finally said, "but we can make a choice that preserves the most potential for future good." The team's final decision surprised Zarail. They didn't choose the statistically optimal solution. They chose a complex rescue strategy that balanced immediate survival with long-term human potential. A young technician would be saved because her research could help thousands. An engineer with unique skills critical to future space exploration would be prioritized. But they also ensured that no group was completely abandoned. In Quillarian strategy, this would be considered inefficient, Zarail observed. Rodriguez's response was unexpected. Efficiency isn't always about immediate numerical outcomes. Sometimes it's about preserving hope, about maintaining our collective humanity. The simulation revealed something profound. Humans didn't see survival as a cold mathematical equation. They saw it as a complex tapestry of individual potential, interconnected stories, and collective hope. Commander Krell was visibly agitated. "This is emotional weakness," he muttered. But Zarail saw something else. This wasn't weakness. This was a sophisticated form of strategic thinking that transcended traditional military logic. As the simulation concluded, Rodriguez turned to her. "We're not just trying to survive," he explained. "We're trying to create a future worth surviving for." The words hit Zarail with unexpected force. Her species had sophisticated technological defenses, intricate political strategies, but they had never considered survival as something more than physical preservation. Humans saw survival as an active, creative process. Each decision was an opportunity to shape a better future, not just avoid immediate destruction. The team's discussion continued, filled with empathy, critical thinking, and a kind of collective intelligence that defied traditional understanding. They weren't just making a rescue decision. They were engaged in a deeply human act of moral imagination. Zarail's tendrils shifted to a deep, contemplative blue. Something fundamental was changing in her understanding of intelligence, survival, and collective potential. The diplomatic mission was revealing that humans were far more than a simple biological species. They were a complex, adaptive system of hope, creativity, and unexpected moral brilliance. The holographic display flickered with terrifying images. The machine civilization known as the Nexus was unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. A ruthless, algorithmic species that converted entire planetary systems into computational resources, eliminating any form of organic life. Princess Zarail watched in growing horror. The Nexus had already consumed 17 advanced civilizations. The Quillarian Empire had lost 3 outer colonies. Every conventional military and diplomatic strategy had failed spectacularly. Lieutenant Rodriguez stood differently now. Gone was the casual demeanor. This was a warrior analyzing a complex threat. "They're not just a technological enemy," he explained, his voice steady. "They're a systematic elimination algorithm designed to maximize computational efficiency by removing organic variability." Commander Krell looked defeated. The Quillarian Strategic Database showed a 97.3% probability of total galactic submission to the Nexus. Their mathematically perfect combat systems had been dismantled with cold, precise efficiency. But Rodriguez seemed almost excited. "Perfect systems have a fundamental weakness," he said, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "They cannot handle true unpredictability." The Nexus operated on predictive models. They analyzed millions of potential scenarios, creating counter-strategies for every conceivable tactical approach. Their computational power was beyond anything organic species could comprehend. Zarail's research showed a consistent pattern. Every species had tried direct confrontation. Every species had been systematically destroyed. Rodriguez pulled up a complex holographic model. Instead of traditional military strategies, his approach looked like organized chaos. Multiple overlapping strategies, deliberate introduction of seemingly illogical variables. We don't just fight, Rodriguez explained. We confuse. We adapt. We turn our perceived weaknesses into strategic strengths. He demonstrated how human military thinking fundamentally differed from algorithmic prediction. Where most species followed logical progression, humans introduced emotional, unpredictable elements that no computational model could fully anticipate. A junior team member shared a historical example. During early computer warfare, human hackers had defeated sophisticated systems not through superior technology, but through creative, unexpected approaches that defied standard logic. The Nexus eliminated species by categorizing and predicting their responses. Humans refuse to be categorized. Our greatest weapon, Rodriguez said, is our ability to be completely, gloriously unpredictable. The strategy he proposed was radical. Instead of a direct confrontation, he suggested a multi-layered approach that would deliberately introduce chaotic elements into the Nexus computational networks. Psychological warfare, deliberate misinformation, strategic illogical actions, emotional manipulation of algorithmic systems. Commander Krell looked like he might collapse. Quillarian military doctrine demanded precise, mathematically perfect strategies. This approach seemed like organized madness. But Zerail saw something else. This wasn't just a military strategy. This was a profound understanding of the difference between computational intelligence and true consciousness. The Nexus could predict logical responses. It could not comprehend genuine creativity. Human unpredictability was their ultimate defense mechanism. Rodriguez's team wasn't just preparing for war. They were preparing to introduce a fundamental variable that no machine could fully understand: human spirit. We don't just fight to survive, Rodriguez said quietly. We fight to preserve the possibility of future potential, of hope, of something beyond pure mathematical efficiency. Zerail's tendrils shifted to a deep, vibrant color, a Quillarian biological response to recognizing something profound and transformative. The diplomatic mission had become something far more significant. This was no longer just a cultural exchange. This was a potential turning point for galactic survival. And humans, with their gloriously unpredictable nature, might be the only species capable of making a difference. The advanced simulation chamber crackled with energy. Holographic displays showed a near-impossible scenario: multiple planetary systems under simultaneous attack by the Nexus machine civilization. Princess Zerail watched in absolute silence, where Quillarian strategists would have frozen. Analyzing countless probabilities, the human team moved like a living, breathing organism. Lieutenant Rodriguez stood at the center, not issuing commands, but facilitating a bizarre form of collective problem-solving. Team members spoke simultaneously, their voices overlapping, each adding a piece to an incredibly complex puzzle. Quantum disruption at Sector 7, Maria called out. Redirecting communication spectrums, Derek responded instantly. Introducing adaptive algorithm interference, Asha added. Commander Krell looked horrified. In Quillarian military doctrine, such simultaneous communication would be considered complete chaos. Here, it seemed like a sophisticated dance of collective intelligence. The simulation showed the Nexus attack, a perfectly calculated assault designed to eliminate all organic resistance. Mathematical precision. Cold. Ruthless. Inevitable. But humans didn't play by those rules. Rodriguez noticed a microscopic weakness in the Nexus computational network, a fraction of a millisecond where their predictive algorithms would create a momentary blind spot. Where any other species would have developed a precise, complicated plan, the humans did something unexpected. They introduced randomness. Small, seemingly illogical actions that made no strategic sense. A communication burst sent in the wrong direction. A defensive formation that defied traditional military logic. Deliberate introduction of emotional variables into a purely mathematical system. We're not trying to win by their rules, Rodriguez explained to Zorail. We're changing the entire game. The simulation progressed. The Nexus attack, so perfect in its initial stages, began to develop unexpected irregularities. Their computational models started to break down, unable to process the constant, creative human adaptations. Zorail realized something profound. Humans weren't just fighting. They were thinking in dimensions that traditional military strategy couldn't comprehend. A junior team member introduced a completely unexpected element, using civilian communication networks as a form of distributed computational interference. Another team member suggested incorporating artistic algorithms into their defensive strategy. It made no logical sense, and yet it was working. The holographic display showed the Nexus attack gradually losing its mathematical precision. Their perfect, cold computational strategy was being dismantled by human creativity. Commander Krell couldn't handle it. "This is madness," he muttered. "No strategic protocol supports these actions." But Zorail saw something else. This was intelligence in its most dynamic form. Not just problem-solving, but problem-redefining. As the simulation reached its critical phase, the human team did something truly remarkable. Instead of a final, decisive strike, they introduced a complex emotional algorithm, something no machine could truly understand. Hope, resilience, the capacity to find meaning beyond pure survival. The Nexus computational network began to fragment. Unable to process these fundamentally organic concepts, its attack strategy collapsed. Rodriguez turned to Zorail, a slight smile on his face. "We don't just fight," he said. "We transform the very nature of the conflict." The simulation ended. Where any other species would have seen a battlefield, humans had created a canvas of collective creativity. Commander Krell looked like he might faint. Princess Zorail's tendrils shifted to a color of deep, profound respect. Humans weren't just a species. They were a living, evolving strategy of survival. The evening light filtered through the base's observation deck, casting long shadows across the room. Lieutenant Rodriguez stood silently, his eyes focused on a small photograph he held carefully. Princess Zorail noticed his change in demeanor. The confident military strategist seemed suddenly vulnerable. "My grandmother," he said, sensing her curiosity. "Her story is why I became who I am." The photograph showed a woman with kind eyes and deep lines of experience. Rodriguez began to share a story that would fundamentally change Zorail's understanding of human resilience. Maria Rodriguez had arrived in the United States with nothing. No money, no language skills, no connections. A refugee from a country torn apart by multiple conflicts, she carried only two things: a small book of poetry and an unbreakable spirit. Her first years were a struggle beyond imagination. Multiple low-paying jobs, night school, learning a new language while supporting her family. Each obstacle that would have crushed most species became a stepping stone for her. She always said, Rodriguez recalled, "Survival is not about avoiding challenges. It's about finding meaning in them." Zorail's research databases had never captured this human phenomenon. Where Quillarian society would have seen such a journey as a series of hardships, humans transformed struggles into narrative of hope. Rodriguez's grandmother had not just survived. She had thrived. She learned English, educated her children, saved money, bought a small house, wrote poetry, volunteered in her community. Each challenge became an opportunity for growth. Commander Krell, listening nearby, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Quillarian philosophy emphasized strategic withdrawal when challenges seemed insurmountable. Humans seemed to do the exact opposite. The story continued. When economic challenges hit, Maria didn't despair. She started a small business. When health issues arose, she found creative solutions. When political systems seemed broken, she became involved in community building. Humans don't just adapt, Rodriguez explained. We reimagine ourselves continuously. Zorail realized something profound. Human resilience wasn't just about physical survival. It was about maintaining hope, creating meaning, transforming limitations into opportunities. The photograph told a story beyond words. Multiple generations of a family that had transformed challenges into strength. Each line on Maria's face represented a battle overcome, a challenge transformed. Rodriguez shared more. His grandmother's poetry, written in a language not her own, spoke of hope, of possibility, of human potential. Each poem was a small act of rebellion against circumstances that would have defeated most species. "We don't measure success by avoiding pain," he said. "We measure it by how we grow through it." Commander Krell muttered something about emotional weakness, but Zarael saw something else entirely. This was a sophisticated survival strategy, emotional flexibility. The capacity to find hope in seemingly hopeless situations, a form of intelligence that transcended mere technological adaptation. As night fell, Rodriguez continued sharing stories of immigrants who became scientists, of refugees who became community leaders, of individuals who transformed personal tragedies into collective strengths. Zarael's tendrils shifted to a deep, contemplative blue. Her understanding of intelligence was fundamentally changing. Humans weren't just a species that survived. They were a dynamic system of continuous reinvention. Each challenge was an opportunity. Each limitation, a potential for growth. The diplomatic mission had become something far more significant than a simple cultural exchange. This was a profound lesson in the nature of consciousness itself. And Princess Zarael was just beginning to understand the true depth of human potential. The final diplomatic summit arrived with an atmosphere of unprecedented anticipation. Representatives from multiple galactic species watched as Princess Zarael and Lieutenant Rodriguez prepared to present their collaborative strategy against the Nexus threat. Gone was the traditional rigid diplomatic format. Instead, the presentation resembled a living, breathing collaborative experience. "We are not proposing a military alliance," Rodriguez began. "We are proposing a new way of thinking about survival." The holographic display came alive with a complex, dynamic representation that defied traditional strategic modeling. It wasn't a static plan, but a flexible, adaptive framework that could change in real time. Zarael stepped forward. Her appearance had changed subtly during the diplomatic mission. Where once her tendrils remained perfectly still, they now moved with a new sense of dynamic energy, a visual representation of her transformed understanding. Commander Krell watched in horror as she began to explain their unprecedented approach. This was no longer a Quilarian diplomatic presentation. This was something entirely new. The strategy they proposed challenged every existing galactic defense protocol. Instead of rigid defensive lines, they suggested a network of adaptive response systems. Where traditional diplomacy demanded absolute certainty, they proposed controlled uncertainty as a strategic advantage. "The Nexus eliminates species by predicting their responses," Zarael explained. "We will make ourselves unpredictable." Their proposal included elements that seemed completely illogical to traditional military strategists. Distributed decision-making systems, emotional intelligence integration into computational models, cultural exchange programs as a form of strategic defense, creative problem-solving workshops, mechanisms that deliberately introduced randomness into strategic planning. The other galactic representatives looked confused. Some looked angry. A few looked intrigued. Rodriguez demonstrated how human historical challenges had prepared them for this exact moment. Climate change adaptation, pandemic survival, technological revolutions. Each challenge had been a training ground for collective problem-solving. "We don't just fight," he said. "We reimagine possibilities." Zarael added her Quilarian scientific perspective, showing how human adaptability could be mathematically modeled as a superior survival strategy. Her research now showed that emotional flexibility was not a weakness, but a sophisticated form of intelligent response. The presentation was unlike any diplomatic summit in galactic history. It was part scientific analysis, part emotional narrative, part collaborative workshop. When they finished, a profound silence filled the room. Commander Krell looked like he might collapse. The traditional Quilarian diplomatic team had been completely sidelined by this new approach. But something remarkable was happening. The representatives were not just listening. They were engaging, asking questions, seeing possibilities they had never considered before. Zoriel's final statement captured the essence of their proposal. Survival is not about protecting what exists. It's about creating what could exist. As the summit concluded, something fundamental had changed. This was more than a diplomatic meeting. This was the potential birth of a new galactic understanding. The Nexus had encountered many civilizations, but it had never encountered anything like humans and their allies. Outside the summit hall, the first rays of Earth's sun broke through the clouds. A new day was beginning, not just for humans, but potentially for the entire galaxy. Princess Zerail looked at Lieutenant Rodriguez. Her tendrils shifted to a color of profound respect and possibility. They had done more than propose a defense strategy. They had introduced a new way of thinking about survival, intelligence, and collective potential.